Hello again, everyone. For those of you who were present in earlier sessions, and welcome to new attendees. It's my pleasure to welcome you to this last Publication Integrity Week session of the day. This one is on technology within the evolving landscape of publication ethics. So we've decided to focus this session on how technology is being used to support publication of research. Well, this will obviously touch on the use of artificial intelligence because AI is a technology. This is not the main focus of this session. We had a different session on AI earlier. And under the realm of technology, we're talking about various initiatives that are tools or systems that to solve problems and support research. So we'll touch on data management, preprints, and open abstract platforms and public knowledge projects, all supported by different techs. And we want to highlight here how such tech-driven initiatives are really fostering transparency, accessibility, collaboration, and integrity, overall increasing, let's say, the robustness of the scholarly ecosystem as a whole. So with all this being said, I will introduce the speakers. I'm Marie Soulière. I'm a COPE Council member since 2020, and I will be moderating this session. And our first speaker is Juan Pablo Alperin, who is the Scientific Director of the Public Knowledge Project and Co-Director of the Scholarly Communications Lab at Simon Fraser University. He will present his work focused on making scholarly communication more equitable and inclusive. As our second speaker, we will have Bianca Kramer. She is an independent advisor and facilitator and the Executive Director of the Barcelona Declaration of Open Research Information. She'll share more on various initiatives for open metadata and quality open research information. And our third and final speaker for the day is Sean Hale, who's the founder and CEO of Senscience and professor at the University of Toronto in Canada and UPFL in Switzerland. He will share more on Senscience AI-ready and fair data platform. So I will now directly hand over to Juan for the first presentation.
Great. Hello. Hopefully you can just confirm someone that you can see my slides and then you can hear me.
Yes, all good.
Great. Always good to check before you launch into things. So thank you very much for the invitation. Thanks to seeing all of the people in the attendees that are here and that hopefully have been participating throughout the day. Great to see a couple of familiar names in there and also so many new ones. So yeah, I'm going to speak a little bit, mostly from my role as a scientific director of the Public Knowledge Project and some of the work that we've been doing. And I'm going to just kind of lay things out in the first few minutes here. I'm going to try to essentially in my less than 8 minutes or so, try to lay out sort of 3 quick points that I want to use as a launching pad for the conversation and the discussion, because research integrity certainly encompasses sort of a wide range of things and concerns and different interpretations of this. And I want to bring forward the way that we've been thinking about it from what we do at the Public Knowledge Project. So those 3 points, I'll just kind of give them to you quickly as a way of getting started, and then I'll dive into a couple of small details in the few minutes that I have. First is that there is actually a really whole world of publishing, in particular of scholarly publishing. And here I really want to emphasize it's like really a global endeavor, much larger and broader in scope than many realize. And we see it quite a bit from our work at the Public Knowledge Project. And it's something that we really bring to the centering of the thinking of how we want to approach the questions around integrity. The second is that world is full of very different kinds of publications, and they don't all look the same. They're coming from different publishers, different languages, different topics, and that diversity also needs to shape our understanding of how we want to approach the questions of thinking about what is work that is done, again, with integrity. And the third is that we can respond to this in a positive way. We don't need to respond with it in like, how do we sort of create ways of sort of filtering out or narrowing our understanding of scholarly publishing as a way of trying to say, well, let's just stick to what we know and let's stick to what we understand as the answer, which is often the case by many people in the space. And from PKP, again, we're trying to put forward an idea that I think tries to respond to the questions of research integrity from a positive lens that takes into account the first 2. So First is that because I've only got a few minutes with you today, I want to point people to this is a publication we did a couple of years ago, but really kind of lays out the thrust of the argument around this question that there is a world of scholarly publishing that's out there and that is diverse. So it's really a place where it's an easy place for me to point people to bring about this question, where we looked at the work that we do with the Public Knowledge Project. For those that don't know, the Public Knowledge Project, we create software for managing and publishing scholarly journals. It's called Open Journal Systems. It's now used by over 50,000 journals around the world. It is sort of software with the project's been around for about 28 years. We're a research initiative based at Simon Fraser University with a couple of other universities that also participate and many other universities that are members and are supporters. We've been around for 28 years as a research project, trying to create open source software to experiment whether making the software available can make it possible to have more research be out there and available to the public. In many ways, we can say that the experiment has been successful, as seen by the 50,000 publications that are now using this software to make their knowledge and their scholarly research openly available. Again, won't have time to dive too much into it, but this is an easy place to point you if you would like to read a little bit more. As I say, what we do with PKP and making the software sort of freely available and people can implement it on their own this is the places in the world where people and the number of journals that people are using the software. We see this as a window to the larger world of scholarly publishing. So by no means do we want to say that this global reach of scholarly publications is just open journal systems, but rather we see it as it has allowed us to be able to get a sense of where these journals are because we can kind of track where these publications that using our software are based. And as you can see, it really is from across the continents with strong presence in Southeast Asia and in Latin America, as well as a few places in Europe and North America as well in terms of number of journals using the software. And I was saying, it's not just OJS. It's actually, we can see this is from another recent study that we did, that when you look at the Web of Science, it kind of takes a look at the proportion of publications that are done by just the largest publishers. It seems to be increasing. But when you look at more inclusive databases like Dimensions or OpenAlex, we actually see that the publications that are published by the largest publishers is actually a decreasing proportion. That's what we see on the left, is that decreasing proportion, because there is this growth in a long tail of small scholarly publishers, such as the ones using OJS, but also other publications out there that are not being published by these large publishers. Which brings me to the second point, that the world is full of bibliodiversity. Those smaller publishers, actually what we see things publishing in the OJS is that only half of them are publishing in English and the other half are publishing in other languages, with Indonesian being about a quarter of the publications, Spanish and Portuguese being huge, and then a really long tail of many languages being published. Again, not just in OJS. When you look at OpenAlex, a more inclusive, again, data source, you see that the Web of Science makes it seem like 96% of everything is in English. When you look at the stated languages in OpenAlex, it's 75%. And actually, this study that was done here, where they tried to do a better job at identifying the language, it's only 68% of the things in OpenAlex that are sort of journals are published in English. Everything else is other languages. So we're seeing a different world. And here another from a smaller study where you can also see that who are these smaller publications? They're largely scholar-owned and scholar-published. So they're not the traditional scholarly publishers, not those large publishers, not even those people that we sort of see as the publishing industry, but rather scholarly communities themselves. And so let me get to the response in just in the couple of minutes. From the Public Knowledge Project, we have really seen that we need to try to understand, because with this diversity comes a wide range of practices. And obviously, when you have that amount of publishing happening, there are things that are being published there that we might not consider to be being done with integrity, or that being done, people that are actually sort of bad actors, let's say, that are trying to sort of subvert or profit from the system in some way. We also just see a lot of people just trying their best and trying to do a good job of publishing, but are using different standards, are using different norms, or maybe not have the same kind of experience in publishing. So how do we try to make sure that we're inclusive of that world and we're inclusive of that diversity without narrowing our view to the things that we have traditionally seen in terms of like commercial publishers publishing in English from the global north. We've seen this approach of trying to use both sort of what are known as whitelist or blacklist, right? Like here's the list of the good journals, the ones that we know are good, the ones that meet, like that are part of this club. Or the approaches of here are the list of the bad journals that we've identified. And we don't think that this is an approach that is going to ultimately lead to having a world of diverse publishing. It's going to be a world where those that are in, and those that are seen as being different are going to be taken out. And so our approach to the black and white is this proposal of a publication facts label. And like the tagline that we've got going with it is the label that puts your journal's research integrity in black and white. And it's really just a way of a standard that we're trying to promote and trying to get adoption industry-wide for a standardized way of journals being more transparent around their scholarly practices. How are they operating? So that people can see that they're really trying to operate and follow those kinds of standards and are even willing to share a little bit about what's going on in the processes behind, and that transparency can bring about trust. It's based in the particular, this is from in the North American and in the UK, in the North, this notion of the nutrition facts label. So you might have recognized that already as having that similar look. And it's because that label, there's been sort of a lot of research that was done in the creation of that label that kind of established this as an effective way of influencing consumer choices. That you know that there's a handful of things that you can look at that can tell you a little bit about what's behind the food, in our case, behind the journal, that can kind of give you a sense of like, what are the ingredients that have gone into creating this piece of scholarship? And that can inform your choices. And that it's not that any number here being high or low is necessarily good or bad. It's just the ability to be a standardized way of being able to see these things give you some confidence. So again, we've developed this in OJS. This is being rolled out right now as a plugin that is being drawn from the data from using OJS that gives you access to a few of these key elements, the number of reviewers, whether there's data availability statements, whether there's funding, acceptance rate of the journal, where they're indexed, things like this, that give you a sense and reinforce that the journal is following these good scholarly standards and what it is that's going on behind them. In practice, this is a journal using OJS. You see that little label. It's not something that's super prominent, but you can roll it out and you can see it. The same way as in a product, you got to turn it to the back of the product to see. It's not something that's intended to be in your face and kind of seen, but for that, when you want to look for it, you can go in and find it. We've been sort of now trying to roll it out, not just in journals using OJS, but we've been speaking to other organizations. And we've got a long list of sort of interest from the publishing community to adopt this standard. Again, we're leading it from PKP, but it's intended to be an industry-wide standard. Because if we don't it doesn't become a recognizable label that people like journalists, the public, other scholars know to look for, then it won't serve its purpose. And we've got a long list of people who have expressed interest. That's not to say that they're ready to adopt it yet, but they are folks that are following closely and are wanting to participate. So I just want to say that's sort of our response. The idea is to help journals to be more transparent around what it is that they're doing, to share that they're using and that they're operating with integrity. And that by being able to be transparent, that they're operating and doing their best to follow kind of these scholarly standards, we can help engender trust, not just within the academic community, but for actors that are coming in, the more occasional readers to research can also have a standardized way of understanding what's going on. So I'll finish there, and I look forward to the discussion.
Thank you, Juan. Super interesting. The percentage of papers in English in OpenAlex was really shocking a bit to me. And the proposal for the standard label is very, very interesting. We see a lot more, as you said, these whitelist, blacklist popping up, especially even at the level of institutions or countries now, where people are trying to take back the ownership of open science and making sure things are validated. So having a standard label would be super helpful, I think, for the different countries and institutions as well. We'll move to Bianca Kramer's presentation now, who will talk to us more about open metadata and research.
Yes, thank you. Just to confirm, can you hear me and can you see my screen?
All good.
Lovely, thank you. So yeah, thanks very much for inviting me. I would have really liked to see also the other presentations today because they're all very relevant. But I'm actually above the Arctic Circle today attending another conference. So just being here for this session. What I would like to do in these 10 minutes, hopefully, is make the case for open metadata for research and publication integrity and share some of the things we are doing about that from the Barcelona Declaration. So just to start, when we are talking about research information, we really mean open scholarly metadata. And so that's bibliographic metadata, including funding information, also information on use and impact, like citations. And just in general, why this is important, it's used in decision-making, it's used to assess the effect of policies, like open access policies, open data policies. It's also used for discovery, to find and assess research results. And that assessment, that evaluation, that's really where it's also important for reproducibility and research integrity. And to make that a little bit more concrete, when we talk about reproducibility, it's about data and code availability. So it's about linking research output, linking articles to data and to code to show that availability. That's done by linking metadata. It's about thinking about a record of version, linking different versions of a publication, making that whole history of a publication transparent. It's about making retractions visible. And it's also about publication fraud, detecting publication fraud and combating publication fraud. And that can be about paper mills, fake authorships, hijacked journals, sneaked citations, and also AI-generated content, included AI-generated or hallucinated citations. So for all this, metadata, scholarly metadata, are important to detect this, to make this visible, to make this transparent. And just as an example, this is a slide taken from Crossref, just some of the metadata that can be available for an article in Crossref, and that can be used to support all these use cases, and that can also be used as trust markers. And there are initiatives, maybe they've come by earlier today or maybe later this week. There are initiatives from STM about promoting research integrity and developing tools and platforms to support research integrity. Dimensions, already mentioned by Juan in passing. They also have specific services for interestingly, not just research integrity, but now called research security, tapping into that wider ranging concern, and also author checks, which also is very much about research integrity. This also makes use of metadata. And my point is that these are all very good developments, but they also run the risk of keeping that information closed, keeping it only available if you are able to pay for it, and maybe also building on what Juan said, making use or only covering a certain part of the total research output, thereby excluding a large number of journals, publishers, authors, and readers. So there are a couple of reasons why we think that it's really important for that metadata to be open. It's about full transparency in assessment. It's about using inclusive data in decision making. And it's also when we talk about open science, including monitoring and incentivizing open science, to also do that using open research information. These are all quite value-laden reasons, which I'm very comfortable talking about. There can also be more hard reasons, like talking about economic value, the value that can be made from using research information, but also what it takes to be for that information to be accessible, affordable. Digital sovereignty, who owns that research information, who controls research information, and also questions about trustworthy AI. If metadata is used also to feed LLMs, how do we ensure the trustworthiness, and who do we afford the authority about that trustworthiness? So a little bit about what the Barcelona Declaration is doing in this regard. we're really targeting institutions, so research performing institutions, research funding institutions, to contribute to this landscape of open metadata. And I'll say a little bit more about how we also include publishers. But what we ask of institutions and funders is to both use and produce open research information, really making openness the default. In doing that, to work together with services and systems that support and enable open research information. A very important part is also then to support the sustainability of these infrastructures, because they can only exist and provide that information if they're both used and supported. OpenAlex is one great example of that. And fourthly, to collaborate together, because collective action can make things go faster and can make things easier for individual institutions. So what do we do within the Barcelona Declaration? We support change at the technical, operational and strategic level, both by facilitating and supporting collective action and by dissemination and outreach activities. And I just want to give you some examples of that, specifically in how we collaborate and discuss this with publishers. And it really stemmed from earlier initiatives like the Initiative for Open Citations, like the Initiative for Open Abstract, that really advocated for larger open availability. And specifically for citations, that was very successful. With Abstract, I think we're about halfway. And I will say a little bit more about that in the end. But that was really an advocacy towards publishers. And now we really want to involve the institutions and the funders in that discussion. And one way of doing that is by including open metadata in publisher negotiations. So we have a joint task force with Open Access 2020 to include that openness in publisher negotiations. And just as an illustration, we had meetings with publishers and publishing systems, really talking about the pathways of how metadata are being captured in the beginning and how they find their way into Crossref and other open infrastructures. And I won't go into detail about this, but when we ask publishers where are the bottlenecks, what makes this difficult, then it's mostly in the capture in front, capturing it from authors or capturing it from full text. And interestingly, not so much at the end. So when we have publishers have that metadata, there are little or no barriers mentioned to making that openly available. While at the same time, we know that in many cases, it's not yet being made openly available. So there are definitely soft barriers there. And that's also interesting to discuss. So we try to include open metadata in publisher negotiations, but that's not the only part. It's also about supporting under-resourced publishers, increasing capacity, and also connecting metadata practices across different systems to include the long tail of publishers, what Juan just mentioned, publishers outside the main, like Global North publishers. So connecting metadata practices. And I just want to end, as one example of that, I also want to mention the Comet project, which is trying to sort of expand the responsibility for good quality metadata, not limit that to what publishers provide, but also including the possibility of corrections from, for instance, the institution, where it's about affiliation metadata, and from other actors. So to really make this more a community approach. And of course, there are many questions related to that regarding authority and quality control. But I think it's a really interesting development. And then I do want to say a little bit about AI. Marie, you mentioned that this is not an AI session, but there are many different areas where this touches upon AI. And one area is that we see increasingly publishers licensing content for training LLMs. And this is just what is publicly tracked. And I don't think there's necessarily anything wrong with that. It's one way to make sure that good quality content finds its way into AI. Where it becomes a problem is when this means that there is less open content available, when this limits the availability of open metadata. And we currently actually see that. When we talk about abstracts, we've seen publishers taking down content from open databases. Like with OpenLX, we've seen the disappearance of abstracts for articles from Elsevier and Springer Nature, non-open access articles. So we really see, and I cannot help but link that to the developments and in AI and the value of abstracts specifically for training LLMs. So I just want to put that out there that I think this can be a barrier and a threat for open availability of metadata. And I just want to reiterate the importance of that openness for including research integrity, for these metadata to be open, and then we can build services on top of that help research integrity, but we should start with the open metadata and not start with the services. And I will leave it at that.
Thank you, Bianca. Yeah, you made a lot of very interesting points, especially for research integrity. As you say, we constantly have these discussions about trust markers and about how to detect potential misconduct and the value of certain things. And typically metadata is one of the ways that research integrity teams look at data, try to detect misconduct. And it's really an advantage for authors to provide it. And for metadata, as you said, for better AI trustworthiness and to make sure that this is integrated properly in all of the databases. Thank you again. We're going to move to the third presentation by Juan, who will focus on fair and AI-ready data.
Great. Thank you very much for having me. And this actually follows on, I think, quite nicely from Bianca's presentation and thinking about, well, how do you actually get open metadata about the data that is used in research? And in fact, I'm coming in as a neuroscientist who's been kind of deeply frustrated by the state of data sharing and data reuse in science. And that's what motivated me to launch Senscience. But just to try to characterize that loss of research potential, I've gone through a bunch of the literature to make a very coarse estimate, because it's very hard to get precise numbers about how much data is being lost. So take this, this is not a peer-reviewed finding, but it's imputed from a number of different studies. So if we think about every 100 data sets that are generated in science, roughly 80 of them are never made public. Maybe 20 of them may be made available, but of those, only 4 are reused. 2 of them may be fully fair, so findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable. But only 1, and I think this is an overestimate, is actually all 3 of those: shared, fair, and cited. And this means that only 1% of research data is really being reused to drive new discoveries. And that, to me, means that there's just immense potential being lost in terms of the investment that goes into science, and that's really, I think, a tragedy for the massive investment that's going on. And these are the references from which those were imputed. So why is this? Why is so much research data lost? In general, when you talk to scientists, they'll say, yeah, sure, I'm willing to share my data and others can reuse it. But in general, they've lacked the tools. It's just really hard to fill out all the metadata, to organize your data, to curate it into something that somebody else can use, to make sure that it's well documented. It's really, really challenging. And oftentimes, I mean, in fact, like 70% of scientists don't even know what FAIR is. And probably the other 30% don't really care very often. Because there's a lack of credit and incentives. Data sharing rarely counts towards their career advancement. There's not a good system for citing data sets. There are DOIs minted for data sets and repositories, but it's very, very rarely used in many domains. Now, all of this is not uniform across the whole scientific domain. There are fields that do this really well. They have a culture for it. But there are cultural and structural barriers that end up resulting that data is often treated as a byproduct, not a primary research output. And I think that these barriers we really have to address deeply by making it really easy for scientists to get their data organized and shared, and make it really valuable to them, so they're highly incentivized, and just make it the norm, make it the standard of how you do it in all domains. So I want to take you through a quick little video of a platform called Fair Squared Data Management, which launched a little over a month ago by Frontiers, and this is powered by Senscience. And it's really geared to making data fair, so findable, accessible, interoperable, and reusable, but also what we call fair squared, which is adding to that AI ready and responsible AI. And the responsible AI really is making sure that sufficient metadata is included to understand the intrinsic biases and limitations and responsible ways in which the data can be reused or should not be reused. And so to do that, to make all of this fair squared, the platform you come to, you log in with either Loop or Orchid, a methodology document, and a structured data table. So we're starting with tabular data at the core of this. We are extending it to many other data types, but at the core, there's really a CSV or a spreadsheet that is at the heart of this. And when you sign in, this is what it looks like. You get greeted with Clara, your AI data steward. Now, Clara is short for clarity, to make your data really clear and reusable. And this is the interface. And you can see on the right is your interface to chat with Clara. And there, Clara can explain to scientists who often don't know what fair means, or how do you actually curate your data? What is this process all about? What does tidy mean? It makes it, gives them expertise to consult with on how to do this along the way, and then also allows the scientists to switch possibly to the language of their preference just for the conversation. So if they're more comfortable, for example, in Japanese, they can switch. And then you drag and drop, just go back here, drag and drop your data and your methods. And it's really important that the methods be part of this. Data shared without the detailed methodology cannot be responsibly reused. And so that's an integral part of this. And then what Clara does is takes this data, and I'll show you an example. This is data coming from the World Health Organization website, just downloaded, not edited or changed at all. So there's a CSV file which contains a bunch of numbers and countries, and then the methods used to infer and impute the tuberculosis burden. And again, this is just a PDF. Nothing was changed. Nothing needs to be in a special format or structure. That Clara can figure it out generally. And then Clara presents to the user the title, the study, authors, and a summary just to validate, did I understand this correctly? And when the user approves that, it will continue to the curation process. Otherwise, you can go back and upload additional files or data or correct information. And then when the curation starts, what Clara does is starts to organize all of the methods, and it can be multiple levels of methods, including the equations, and the user can come in and edit all of this at any point, at any location, to start to make sure that the documentation of the methods is complete. And when the user approves that, Clara will then build a data dictionary. And the data dictionary includes the details of all the variables, as well as the link between the variable definitions and the method. So it contextualizes the data dictionary to make sure you know where in the methods is every variable described, how it was actually measured. And again, the user is able to go and edit and correct anything if there's any issues, any errors sneak in there. And then, of course, Clara is available to help along the way. And after that, then Clara will make a proposal of visualizations based on the domain, based on the knowledge of from the methods and what this data is about, the study details. Propose visualizations that are useful for summarizing the data set, for giving an overview of the data set, and then giving the user a very quick way to generate summary figures now that are not about making a particular scientific claim. And that's important here. So the user can go and reorganize this, choose new ones, ask for new ones, remove them, and so on. But this is about identifying ways in which you can document, and this is where Clara drafts this data article, which is based on a descriptive characterization of the data set, including the descriptive visualizations. It's not about making a scientific claim. It's not about making a rich, in-depth contextualization of a scientific finding as you would have in a scientific article. This is about making sure that the data is richly described so that others can understand it, understand its strengths and limitations, and how to actually reuse it responsibly. And so this is the sort of thing that scientists almost never really want to do. And it makes it really, really easy. And then in addition, Clara will build a data explorer to be published alongside of the paper, where you can have an interactive exploration of the data with data brushes and filters so that anybody can come in and have a very easy way of getting to understand the data. And then all of that is previewed as the data portal that will be published to accompany the data article. All of this is then peer reviewed through Frontier's normal peer review system to be confirmed for publication. And so this is the inaugural Fair Squared data article and portal. This is from 30 years of maritime measurements. And so you see the Data Explorer here showing the different sampling sites off the coast of Spain, using a data brush to explore which sites had which measurements at which time, what were the top species of fish, invertebrates, plankton, and so on. And so it gives, again, a very direct way of easily interacting with this data. And all of that goes through peer review. So the reviewers have already given their feedback. Then there's all the metadata filled out about the data package, how to cite, the funding information, a Fair Squared compliance certification, which we'll talk about, but it basically lists the explicit reasons why this conforms to fair and Fair Squared principles, including the AI readiness and responsible AI. And all of the detailed methods that have been organized, as well as the data dictionary, are part of this portal, right? All of that information is open, publicly available, always accessible, as well as, of course, the data. And so that's a lot of information to make sure that the data is really robustly documented, including all the contributions. But that's a lot of information. And it's much easier if you have a specific question to use Clara to then just type into the chat and say, well, how was the fish population measured? Or what does this mean to me maybe as a policymaker? Or maybe I'm a grade schooler who wants to reuse this. I can just ask, explain this to me like I'm 10. And it provides a very robust, flexible way of getting all the details of how the data was captured, as well as how to understand the data set and its implications and its strengths and limitations in a very easy way. Now, this has been done for other types of data, just very quickly, just to show for the COVID receptor binding protein, 3,000 variants were produced. So this is all peer reviewed and published as well. So it can support very, very diverse data types. I just want to quickly mention that. And then this is an example of the Fair Square data article that accompanied that first portal that I showed you. All of this, brings a lot more attention to the data. It also fits into the scholarly record. So it fits into the incentive structure to say, hey, this author, by making their data available, they get that portal, they get that article. It's all peer reviewed. It fits into their tenure package. This is something that is valid as a real contribution of their science. Part of the portal is also to have an included Jupyter notebook so that anybody who wants to do more advanced analysis has direct Python code examples of how to directly load up that data. All of this can also run in Google Colab, or you can download it and run it locally, but including reproduction of the figures that were part of that. And then the Fair Squared Compliance Certificate. Now, this is something that we received a lot of feedback about, that this was really valuable to show funders or other publishers or institutional data offices to say, hey, this is how we are really taking seriously the importance of making this data truly findable, accessible, interoperable, reusable, AI ready, and responsible AI aligned. Now, all of this data is, as I mentioned, fully open. We do deposit the data in Zenodo as well as keeping it in the cloud for the data portal and the data hosting. But we are also working with different communities that have community-specific repositories. So we do fully support the domain-specific deposition and data sovereignty requirements. But that does take, of course, a conversation to understand those specific requirements. All of this is built on top of an open specification, the Fair Squared Open Specification, which is itself built on many existing open standards. We did not invent new standards. We wanted to adopt the things that have already been great, been invented already, are well supported by community efforts, and that we are also making contributions to. And that's all visible on fair2.ai. So with that, I'll end, and thank you for your attention, and happy to have the discussion. Look forward to that.
Thank you, Sean. Many thanks to our three speakers for these very interesting and engaging presentations. There was a lot of interlinks between all of them. I'm looking at the Q&A. I'm going to touch on them after asking a first question about all of these initiatives are really aimed at improving transparency and trust in the public record and open science in general, which is particularly needed in this age of misinformation and misconduct and integrity issues. What would be one very concrete practice you'd recommend that journals or institutions adopt in the next year to make a really visible difference in open science? We can maybe start with Juan.
I mean, I think it's, well, obviously, I mean, for any journals and to encourage, I would say, like, just bringing forward and echoing my talk, like just like something that, like a standardized way of bringing forward your transparency, what we're proposing, I think is one of those key things. But to take the less easy answer in terms of just not just promoting the idea that we've been trying to champion, I think it is around helping to make sure that internally within their operations, there is a good understanding of what are the kinds of what are the practices that you're doing that like journals that are operating, they know like we're doing this practice and this is how we are trying to ensure that the quality of the work that we put forward is good. And so I think it is around kind of taking stock of those elements and making sure that they are visible to the outside. And it can be through these standardized ways, but also these are things that can be shared even by putting them forward in policies. If you're doing this kind of work, making sure that like to echo what the work that is being championed by the Barcelona Declaration, make sure that if you're doing these processes, if it's available in your metadata, then other people can also discover that you're following those processes. And like, for example, so there are these things that it's both taking stock of like, what are my practices that I'm using to ensure integrity? And then what are the different ways in which I can try to make sure that those are visible to the outside? Because if you're only doing them internally for yourself, then it is, that's great because you have that certainty, but it's not a good way to communicate them beyond your publication.
Thank you. Bianca.
Yeah, to build seamlessly on what Juan said. Yeah, that openness, like any initiatives that you take and any initiatives you also take to collect good quality metadata and to connect that metadata, to also make that publicly available just as part of transparency, and also to enable building services on that. And also I would say to enable to link those metadata to other systems. Like I talk a little bit about the pathway from publishers to COSF, which is what is used a lot, and having DOIs and having the associated metadata for the DOIs is really, really helpful, but it's not the only metadata practice. And I think it would be great to connect metadata associated with DOIs to also metadata available for journals and publishers who use other identifiers. But to be able to do that, that metadata needs to be openly and transparently available. So that would be my first recommendation.
Yeah, that graph was very eloquent in showing publishers see where the big pain point is. It's really at the beginning. They do get the data,
Yeah.
but they don't sort it out properly to be able to share it afterwards. Sean?
Yeah, I think it won't come as a surprise. I think that data needs to be paid attention to as a scholarly output, and it needs to be recognized. To me, it's the foundation of science, and it's been wildly neglected for far too long. So, of course, that also does require the openness of metadata that Bianca and Juan are talking about as well.
Thanks, Sean. I'll take questions from the audience, one for each of you. So we'll start with Juan. There's a question on whether peer review type, double blind, single blind, or even open peer review would be an eligible point to include in the label you suggest. And how do you think this would weigh in favor or against a publication in terms of perceived integrity and quality?
Yeah, it's a good question, Teresa. And I think one actually gives me a chance to talk about a couple of the considerations that have gone into it that I obviously couldn't get to in just a short presentation. One is that any element is eligible to be considered for the label. So we have proposed a handful of the things that are there. We've actually been doing research over the last couple of years. We've done focus groups with editors, with students, high school students, with journalists. And trying to understand what are the things that resonate with them. An important part of the label and of transparency in general is that it also it has an educating element. The same way, again, and really the nutrition facts, the label that appears on the back of food acts in that same way, that it needs to be a limited number of things so that you can actually imagine what's the pathway by which people that are coming across it for the first time can start to get educated in these are the things that are core. And so we've put, for example, number of reviewers and time to review as two of the things that are included in the label. Those are things that we've been hearing back in our feedback are important. The time to review one is one that was added actually as part of our sort of research process. I am not sure, and I think that the different types of review, whether they're open or closed, might be a little too inside baseball, a little too for the research community. Like you start getting into these kinds of levels of detail that are not necessarily going to be so understandable to people that are coming across them for the first time. This can be evaluated and tested. So I'm not shutting the door on it. I'm saying like our sense from where we've seen the conversations go is that fewer elements is better than more, and kind of higher level elements are enough. It's not going to be an answer. And none of these things that appear on the label tell you, oh, if you have these numbers or if these things are included, you're quote unquote a good journal. It is a way of giving a door for people to basically say, I am willing to expose these things and give you the way to look into these elements. And I'm attesting that this is my inside process. And so I don't think being open or being closed review makes you more or less means that you're operating with more or less integrity. I think that your willingness to share that information, make it easily findable and available, is what demonstrates that you are following whatever process you're following, but you're doing so from a place of trying to operate on a best practices, following scholarly sort of standards and norms, while allowing for that flexibility and that diversity in that different publications, different fields, different places have different research cultures. And we don't want to say these are the only narrow band of practices that we consider to be valuable. So hopefully that answered and not answered your question, Teresa, but hopefully give you a bit of insight into the thinking of how we would approach whether we would want to include the nature, if it's anonymous review or not anonymous review, into adding it to the label, and how we are hoping the label helps to shape the conversation and helps to educate that public the scholarly and non-scholarly public around what are the kinds of things and thinking that they should be looking for.
Thanks, Ron. Yeah, I think what you mentioned also during your presentation about these stats, about how people perceive more transparency as being more trustworthy, this is an important point to go back to as well. Bianca, a question for you. So what types of trust markers stand out for you as the most useful for publishers and editors? There's been a lot of talks about using ORCID, but there's a misuse of ORCID, or the use of non-institutional email addresses by trustworthy others that makes them then automatically untrustworthy because some publishers rely on institutional email addresses. So which would be your main trust markers that you think are the best?
Yeah, that's an interesting question. I think it's a combination of trust markers, and author IDs can be one part of that. I think there's also a question with the reliability of ORCID having that information available and being able to see that a given author by name uses multiple ORCIDs. That can be a trust a marker of negative trust, so to say. So seeing those patterns in themselves can be trust markers. I find it very interesting. I actually learned this recently that, for instance, Colsef has authenticated ORCID in their metadata, but that does not mean that the ORCID is authenticated in the ORCID record by the institution. It just means that Colsef is getting it from the publisher. So I think a clear communication of that and maybe a better integration that that authentication in ORCID finds its way into the metadata will help with that. I also want to push it back a little bit towards the like the proxy, using an institutional email as a proxy of trustworthiness, because that excludes researchers that are not affiliated with an institution. So on the one hand, I can perfectly understand why that is a proxy, but I don't think we should go that far as to make it like a requirement almost. We should also always keep in mind, like, who do we exclude by making these, assigning these trust markers or setting these proxies. Just some thoughts around this. As usual, it's not a clear-cut answer. It's a very complex reality.
That's very true. But I think, would you be in general in favor into going towards trust markers versus the red flags that are the, the negative exclusion versus the positive promotion?
Definitely. Both that and both looking at combinations and patterns. So not having one single marker be a proxy, but really seeing things in context and combining multiple signals to get a broader picture.
Thank you. Then for Sean, I'm going to combine a couple of questions that are about Clara in Fair Square. So one is about whether it's a free service, how is it integrated? Is it just integrated with Frontiers? How can this be handled? And then separately, given that you're providing all the metadata to an AI tool, how is it granted that the data is not misused?
Yeah, so great questions. First of all, this is a commercial service offered by Frontiers as part of publishing a new article type, which is a Fair Square data article, but it's their Fair Square data management service. And the way that you access it is you go to Frontiers submission system and you select Fair Square data as your submission, and then that will bring you into the to the whole platform. So actually you can experience it for free, but you do, when you make a submission, it is part of submitting and paying for a peer-reviewed article on Frontiers. So it's not intended that this stay, Frontiers only. We do certainly want to see this have a broader impact and work with other publishers or repositories or others to make this more widely available. But I think it's certainly great to see that Frontiers was willing to kind of take this risk and innovate in this space. And then the other question about the misuse of the data. I mean, I think that this is a challenge with any open data. And in fact, what we try to do is, by providing extensive documentation about the data and how it was produced, as well as explicitly enumerating appropriate and inappropriate ways of reusing the data, we think we're providing a lot of guidance in ways in which the data can be responsibly reused, and we think that there's still a role for kind of community good practice and ethical and responsible reuse of data, that you take that into account. But we don't see ourselves, or certainly not Senscience, playing a role in policing how people reuse the data. I do think that there's an important need, and this gets back to one of the topics raised earlier. If AI is actually going in and reusing this data, I think there's an obligation to make a citation out of that, and to play by good community practice, cite the fact that your AI model was built using this work. I think that that's a gap that started essentially with the way these big commercial models have been built from the start, where they just ignored any kind of provenance and credit giving to the training data. And I think that is very important to change.
Yeah, this goes back to what Bianca showed as well, the disappearance of the abstract now that there are specific licensing agreements, and then some of the data goes back to being more closed because there is this added value that you can sell it to AI partners. All right, I think there's just 1 minute left, so I'm just going to do a closure. Thank you so much for all of your presentations and for your willingness and to join for this session and to answer all the questions. I know you're in 3 different countries in very different time zones, so thank you very much. Thank you to all the attendees also that have joined from all over the world for today. We're coming to the end of Publication Integrity Week Day 1. And massive thank you to everybody, and we look forward to seeing many of you in tomorrow's sessions for day 2, focused on the theme of diversity, equity, inclusion, and access. So bye for now. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Goodbye.